Now, here for the month of July at Centers for Spiritual Living, we are talking about relationships. For the last couple of weeks, we've looked at the relationships we have with ourselves and with others. And while we seem to be independent beings, we are, in fact, interdependent with everything and everyone around us. I like to begin each of my talks by taking us back to our basic principles or our core concepts. And so for this month, we are working with one of our statements from our Declaration of Principles, written by our founder, Ernest Holmes. Our principle for the month is, we believe in the individualization of spirit in us, and that all people are individualizations of the one spirit. So this week, our focus is on the relationship we have with the society in which we live. There are many subtle nuances to this relationship and to what this relationship means to each one of us and for the world in which we live. They can vary greatly. And just like we individually are completely interdependent with everyone and everything around us, the particular society in which we live affects the larger global society. Here at Centers for Spiritual Living, we have a global vision of creating a world that works for everyone and all of creation. It's easy for us to look at creating a world that works for us individually, but it can be challenging to create a world that works for everyone and still have our own needs and desires met. Creating a world that works for everyone calls us to become more of a unified society, where the needs of the one do not outweigh the needs of the many, while still allowing each one of us, to become fully self-actualized individual within the entirety of this collective whole. Living, moving, and being the expression of a unified society calls us to a new paradigm. It calls us to create a more evolved way of being, where we practice our philosophy as a beloved society. We're invited to not only embody love, not solely on an individual manner, but rather in a collective manner. We're invited to look at and look for the ways we can engage in society to nurture and embolden a healthier, compassionate, equitable, and loving relationships for all people. This idea of creating a beloved community or beloved society is not a new idea. In the 50s and the 60s, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of creating a beloved society, and he devoted his work and his life to creating what he called the beloved community. By doing so, he showed us a path to a society that maximizes empathy, compassion, and love, and also leads to the health and well-being of everyone. In 1956, Dr. King spoke of the beloved community as the end goal of nonviolent protest. He said in a speech at the Victory Rally following the announcement of the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to desegregate the seats on the Montgomery buses, "The end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of the beloved community. It is this type of spirit and this type of love that can transform opponents into friends. It is this type of understanding, goodwill, that will transform the deep gloom of the old age into the exuberant gladness of the new age. It is the love which will bring about miracles in the hearts of men." So what stops us from realizing the beloved society, or, as Dr. King called it, the beloved community in our current world? As I said in our spiritual principle of the month, we are the individualization of spirit, and all of creation is the individualization of that one. In this, we have unity without uniformity. And in our individualized experiences, we have all been subjected to unique circumstances that have formed who we are. Many of these circumstances form the basis of our belief system. In addition to those beliefs that have been formed based on our experiences, we are also under the influence of a belief system that was in operation long before we came into existence, and belief systems that are part of the collective consciousness of the society in which we live. In our philosophy, we call this race consciousness. It blends our own thought patterns and shows up in our beliefs. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, describes it this way: the creative nature of our thought involves the sum total of the content of our mind. This means that our habitual thought patterns are being reflected in all of our images of thought. Also, the subconscious mind is a great creative reservoir. Then we are all immersed in and experiencing race consciousness, and it is operating through each one of us to a greater or lesser degree. This race consciousness and these belief systems which we have internalized lead us to having biases that we may or may not even be aware of. In a series of talks I was giving in 2019, I came across a research study that began at Harvard University in the late 1990s. Through the course of this research project, the scientists behind it created a series of tests that you could take to discover the implicit biases that were operating in your belief system. Those things that we don't even know are operating, yet are affecting so many of the decisions that we make and so many of the beliefs that we hold true on an unconscious basis because of the race consciousness that we are permeated in all the time. This work has been expanded upon by additional researchers from the University of Washington, the University of Virginia, and Yale University. It has now become a nonprofit organization that collects societal information about biases we hold and how they influence society in general. I found it quite fascinating to take these tests and to see the areas in which I had biases that I wasn't even aware of that were operating in my life. For instance, the first test that I took was based on skin tone biases, which determines the degree to which you make decisions based on the color of a person's skin. I was pleased to see that I had very little bias towards skin tone. I took the gender bias assessment and found that I slightly favored females, which seemed to be natural for me. So I repeated this with several of the tests and found that I had some slight biases here and there, depending on the topic. And then I took the test on the biases for weight. Now, I have been an overweight person almost my entire life, and I grew up in a family of mostly overweight people. So I have to tell you that it was quite shocking for me to see a strong bias against overweight people. I did not even know that was operating in my life. But it talks so much about the feelings that I've had about being an overweight person and my reactions to it and how I move through society. And as I said, for me, this was quite shocking to see this revelation. Race consciousness. We all have beliefs that have been passed down through the generations that we never even question the validity of. We have beliefs about other people, other religions, how certain people should act, about gender roles. We have ideas about age, and oh, so many other biases that we are not even aware are operating in our lives on a daily basis. These ideas permeate every aspect of our existence. They determine how we think about others. They determine how we act towards others. They determine who we think deserves what in our world. And even when we think we are evolved and enlightened, these old beliefs are still operating in our existence. It would be one thing if these beliefs only affected us individually. Unfortunately, they affect many, many aspects of our society. They affect how our society operates. And more importantly, they affect the laws that we make as a society. Some laws we can easily identify as being for the protection of the society that made the laws. Some laws make total sense Some laws are very logical, and we wouldn't have it any other way. But some laws are made to protect a certain portion of the society while hurting and harming others. This happens because the society is not seeing them as being equal. They don't believe they have an equal part in the society. They don't believe that the people or the groups that they are forming the laws against have an equal right to even have the same protection as everyone else. Each country throughout the world has its own history of laws that have affected different portions of the population. We had slavery and Jim Crow here in the United States, apartheid in South Africa, and there was all of the anti-Semitism in Hitler's Germany. These are just a few examples. In creating a world that works for all, the role and the responsibility of being a spiritually mature society is certainly something worth discussing, as well as the role of spiritual laws in the creation of societal laws that demonstrate the wonder and the magnificence of God as it's moving in, through, and as all that is. When we can take our spiritual laws and apply them in a discerning way to our societal laws, I believe we are working more and more towards creating that world that works for everyone. For years, possibly since humans first developed communication, there have been many incidences of complaints and commentaries about what is wrong with the world. What's wrong with the government? What's wrong with churches, this country or that country, the weather, our jobs, our spouses, our children. There's a huge amount of energy that is going into making all of these complaints. And all of that energy has not made one thing better. It is only when dedicated people see a vision of change and work towards it that any effective or beneficial changes have ever occurred. If we are going to change society, then we must first begin to discuss and envision and work towards becoming the beloved society. We are invited to release our fixation with the problems of the world, the problems with the society in which we live, the problems with our families. This does not mean bypassing those conditions or experiences. They are very valid and very real to the people who are harmed by unjust laws. We cannot ignore them. Fortunately, our philosophy, the science of mind and spirit, gives us the same ability to see a condition and to transform, transmute, or transcend it in order to reveal the truth of it. Society is an agreement between people. And if we are manifesting a world that works for everyone, that means we must first manifest societies that work for all. And that means our relationships with each other and with those whom we may never ever meet who are affected by the laws and our policies. Systems that continue to oppress anyone must not be left unchecked. For example, in many places around the world, there are societal norms that continue to perpetuate hatred and violence against women, against minority groups, against members of the LGBT community, against anyone who seems to be different. Groups that have been traditionally oppressed are impacted even if they don't live in an oppressive culture. What happens to women in one part of the world affect women in every part of the world. What happens to certain minority groups in one section of our country is felt by people in the other sections of our country. The effects of oppression are far-reaching. And within the various societal groups, there are people who choose to do the work required to change the system, required to change the laws, to develop relationships so that everyone has equal rights, equal protection under the law, and the freedom to live, being who each one of us is as an individualized expression of spirit. So this week, as you interact with the world around you, periodically pause and look at the societal norms you and those around you have agreed to follow through that lens of a world that works for all. In other words, as I approach something and I see something that doesn't quite feel right, ask myself, is this working for everyone? Or is it only working for a select few? And as you notice things in your surroundings that are not demonstrating this vision, ask yourself, what can I do to help create the beloved society in my community? And then once you have your answer, do it. It might be volunteering at a school or helping out your neighbor with some yard work. It may be speaking out against an injustice. It may involve you sending some money to a special group. And of course, there is always, always the invitation to do our own spiritual work, to know what we know in truth, to do what we need to do to clear out our own hidden biases, to begin that work of reconciliation within ourselves and within the society in which we in is noble work. It's what we're called here to do. And it can be greatly supported by the spiritual practices that we have. So let's do that now. Let's take this into one of our spiritual practices, our affirmative prayer, where we actually begin to join in that collective consciousness and to know the truth. So please join me in prayer. And so right here and right now, I know that there is only one power, one presence, one divine creative source of all. That creative loving intelligence that has brought forth everything into existence, that is living through all of creation, that is showing up as it, manifesting itself perfectly in every case. And because I know there's only one, I know that I am one with it. I know that I am that individualization of spirit. And because I know this is true for me, I know that all of creation, everyone, is that individualization of spirit right here and right now, created perfectly and completely. Nothing missing, nothing lacking. And so knowing this truth, I speak my word. I know that right here and right now, each one of us has the opportunity to go within, to find those places where hidden beliefs are operating in our lives, to examine them, to explore them, to see the validity of them, and to do whatever work is necessary to heal and create that world that works for everyone in all creation. I know that each one of us has been brought to this moment to do this work right here and right now. I know that we are completely capable of it. We have been given all of the tools necessary for the evolution of our consciousness and the evolution of the society in which we live. Each one of us is a builder of this beloved society. Each one of us is a contributing member to the beloved community. And each one of us is a gift right here and right now. And I just give great thanks for this knowing. I'm so grateful to see it operating. I'm so grateful to feel it in my heart and to know it is the truth. And I release this word into the law, into that part of spirit that always says yes, that knows no lack or limitation, and is always moving in an ever-spiraling evolution of consciousness. I let it go and I let it be. And so it is. Amen.